There will be no non-disclosure agreements violated this morning.
All right, perfect. One of the best ways to learn about theory of constraints is from someone that's actually applied it. Thomas LeMay is going to share how he uses and approaches theory of constraints so that you can also benefit from Eliyahu Goldratt's work and use it in your own practices.
So the first thing you have to do, you have to get this book, The Goal.
The Goal. We'll pop it up so
You have
your
to get it.
camera.
And I would say, and I've told this in your presence, don't just get the book, get the audio. And the reason I say that, because it is, in my opinion, I'm probably biased, but I don't care. It is probably the best audiobook that's ever been made. And the reason why I say that, it's number one, the subject matter is I mean, it's the subject matter we're going to talk about today. But two, voices, actors, what does it have? It has music.
Sound effects.
It has sound effects. Yeah, it does. And it's like watching a movie, but you don't have the video. It's everything else. And so it's kind of immersive. So you kind of enter yourself into this story. That's the goal. And when you do that and read it and go over it and apply it to your life, it's amazing. So I just want to leave with that. I don't know if you want to add a tidbit there too.
No, that's perfect. Yeah. And it's got a bonus. Well, the tidbit, now that since you baited me, the tidbit at the end of the audiobook is the bonus chapter where Eliyahu Goldratt reads Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. It was like a blog post or a paper. I think it was a paper that he wrote where he was talking about some of the history of where he came to the concepts of what he had and where he built it from. So that's a fantastic read. Highly recommend.
And it links it to Lean.
Yeah. And it's his own voice. And I listened to it like at a 1.3x or to 1.5 or 6x. So you can really hear the passion and sometimes anger in his voice as he's going through that Standing on the Shoulders of Giants.
Yeah. I didn't get a chance to take any seminars with Dr. Goldratt, but I definitely have listened and consumed as much as possible. I'm sitting here with its whole catalog, and perhaps maybe downstream we'll start talking about critical change. But today we're going to do theory of constraints. So I'm just going to get right into it. And it's important that when you do any kind of introduction to a subject, you tell people exactly what they're going to get into. Who would read this or go through this with me? It's like, okay, I'm going to show you a brand new subject, but this is what we're going to approach. And I put people in a frame of mind and I kind of hopefully get them into a mood. It's like, I am ready to accept this. So this is less just blasting information at a person. This is going to be different. We're going to approach problems in new ways, maybe ways you haven't even considered, or at least maybe in ways that we're going to tweak the way we have a mindset about issues and problems and constraints. And that's what this is the introduction section of the agenda. The next one is like constraints and construction. I think that word dropped off for some reason. And then the next one is cognitive bias. And that's important because cognitive bias just creeps into life and it's impossible to escape from. So we'll talk about how cognitive bias creeps into your problem solving and your constraint removal process. There's also identifying process. It's funny that I put bias before identifying because it's true. If you have bias, sometimes you can't even see.
Right.
And I'll prove it to you.
Oh, I believe you.
Prioritize and assign resources. So once you've identified things, you have to use your planning, your scrum boards, your CPM schedules, your last planner, that all of these things that we already use. Now you have to use them even better and even more efficiently because now you have to get to this prioritization and focusing steps. And then there is a tool. It's a constraint log. I'll show the basic steps of using a constraint log correctly. And then there's some visualization techniques that help you once you've done all of those steps. You've done all of your prioritization. You've done all of your worksheets. Everything's all dialed in. Maybe you got a Power BI going. Once you get to that, you visualize and you show that to people. You show your visualization to the workers out in the field. You show it to architects in other places. Say, hey, this is our priority. This is the constraint. And you have to get people to agree that that's the problem. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Love
Let's get
it.
into it. So here's the guy. Here's the man himself, Dr. Goldratt. And he wrote a book. It's like, what is this thing called theory of constraints and how it shall be implemented? But yeah, so there's Eli Goldratt. He lived for a pretty long time, recently passed, but on his gravestone, this is Dr. Goldratt's gravestone in Israel. And it's so good. But he put on his tombstone, these are 6 kind of, I guess, outward going principles that he left on the world, and it's still sitting there today. There's number 1, people are good. Every conflict can be removed. 3, every situation, no matter how complex, is exceedingly simple. Number 4, every situation can be substantially improved. Every situation. Number 5, every person can reach a full life. And number 6, there is always a win-win solution. And I think that's important, that Dr. Goldratt's kind of like legacy on, above, above his mortal remains is this statement about like hope and study and improvement and full life. Isn't that great? Like,
That's
man, it's like
amazing.
everything out there is like, that's nothing like I've accomplished. I was a award-winning physicist and a best-selling novel author. None of that's on here. Everything that's on his tombstone is what he did, like, what his name is, and then his outward statement in English about a whole bunch of positive things. I think that's really great. So I always put this in the frame of mind whenever I'm dealing with problems, that there's, no matter how complex this issue is, we can make it more simple.
Yeah, I love it. His philosophy shows through. Beautiful philosophy. And
So that's how you have
surprise,
to,
we're
yeah,
aligned with it, right, Thomas?
yeah. And that's why I talk about fear. I talk about being assertive. When I talk about like approaching situations and constructions, we have to do scientific study. These 6 words right here is where that comes from. A lot of it, really hits me in a good way. And since I've studied a lot of his stuff, and then I kind of understand the man, I always put this in here because this is where this theory of constraints, like this is the goal. So let's go. What's a constraint? There are many constraints, and I think you've heard me, Felipe, talk about being in airports. When you're in an airport, you're in many constraints. Well,
Yes.
let's talk about basically 2. So, and right in the middle there's a physical constraint. Things that are physical constraint, like me and my upside down K cup, right? Like you can't physically, unless you damage it, you can't physically insert that K cup incorrectly, because you're restricted with dimensions and those kind of things. So we have to understand those. And some of those are even designed in, like the good people at Keurig design that system where, hey, without damaging the equipment, if you put the K cup in, it will nest in there and it won't leak all over. So you're held back by force, physically impossible to perform a task. So sometimes human beings can be physically constrained, right? With handcuffs and put behind bars. So that's it's not always a good situation for human beings, but for things, it's actually sometimes a good thing. So we don't damage things. We don't get stuff out of control. So that's a physical constraint. The harder ones are non-physical constraints. And you have to put people into a constraining condition by policy or law or agency conditions, like fire alarm restrictions, those kind of things. Limiting factors in contracts. Oftentimes, we would say a non-physical constraint in a contract. We are forced to utilize raw materials from a particular place, or avoid using components from specific places. So those are constraining conditions that we must understand. Another one, non-physical constraints are budgets and schedules. We have to understand these. we have to understand budgets and we have to understand schedules, those kind of things. So they put things into, they put some boundaries around things. There's other constraints, and I put them over here. Learned helplessness and unwritten cultural norms. You ever felt a cultural norm become a constraint?
Welcome to the EBFC show, the easier, better for construction podcast. I'm your host, Felipe Engineer Manriquez. This show is all about the business of construction.
Today's show is also sponsored by the Lean Construction Institute. LCI is working to lead the building industry in transforming its practices and culture. Its vision is to create a healthy and thriving industry that delivers outstanding project outcomes every time for everyone. Check the show notes for more information. Now, to the show.
Absolutely. Yeah, especially working across the United States. I mean, it's not like one construction project in one metropolitan area is not going to act and behave the same way as people in, say, in a rural setting, far, far away from the city, or if people are like away from their home office by states and states away. There are these invisible cultural things that absolutely are heavy-handed in how people are going to behave on the project.
Yeah, we have to acknowledge those, right? So,
Right.
and then a kind of another category that I've really kind of been interested in, but it's this idea of missed or unknown opportunities. It's an emotional thing. So it's like it's ignorance of alternative or unexplored options. It's like there could be a way out of the situation, but we just don't know what it is because we just don't know. Confusion definitely comes into play due to poorly designed processes. Confusion becomes a constraint real quick when we're in poorly designed processes, and then misjudging the impact of delays. Now now we're talking a little bit about bias. We talk about misjudging, but the two big ones in our industry are physical and non-physical. Those are the two big ones. The behavioral ones, those definitely creep in, but I would say that the two big ones that which we must overcome first are physical and non-physical. And this is bias. The one on the left, confirmation bias. I've felt this all the time. It's this comforting lies or unpleasant truths. And we will have a tendency to search for, interpret information in a way that confirms one's perception. So if I believe that we are behind, and I am a person who is of importance, or maybe I'm a person of authority without any kind of proof or scientific truth, people will align themselves with that. And it's something you have to overcome, and it's something you have to recognize very quickly. So utilizing the theory of constraints, it'll actually push you out of the situation. So if left out of control, we will gravitate towards things that are easy versus things that take a bunch of time, but are actually attacking a problem. And then another one is availability bias. And this happened here in the Southeast last summer. There was a attack on a gas pipeline, a hacker attack, and they shut down a gas pipeline that was in the Southeast for like a day. I think it was a day, or maybe it's 2 days. But everybody went out and filled up their gas tanks in their car, and there was no gas. Like you couldn't buy gas. You couldn't buy gas. And the reason why, because there's more capacity in everybody's fuel tanks than there are capacity in the gas station. So if we all run the gas station, we're going to run them out, and then there's none for anybody. So it creates that hoarding behavior. When you feel like you don't have something, you just be like, whatever's the closest, let's just do that. So it's a tendency to overestimate the likelihood of events with a greater availability in memory. So it's like if it's in the front of your mind, like, oh, we might not have the ability to get fuel for 2 days. I have to go to work, and I got to go to stuff. So I'm going to go right now tonight and fill up my tank all the way. And if we all did that, we run it out. There's more capacity in all of our vehicles than there are capacity in the places that serve that. So those are two that you have to kind of understand that they are real. They're unavoidable. And we have to overcome them with a consciousness greater than just what's here. So we can't just overcome them confirmation bias by calling people liars. Can't do that. And then we can't overcome availability bias with a warm blanket and a cup of tea and be like, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. Like, no, we must take greater steps than what's on the surface level. So we've got to dig into stuff. So this is a physical constraint. And this is a real one. And this actually affected me. This was a overpass on 880, California, Felipe.
I know. I recognize
This is
it.
this is the spaghetti bowl in it's the southbound and I think southbound and westbound off ramps off of the Bay Bridge going towards San Jose or Oakland. And there was a tanker truck that got in an accident and caught on fire and burned this section of bridge. I think it happened in the mid 2000s. Let's say 2000. But this is a real physical constraint. And I'll ask you, Lipe, what's the physical constraint?
A physical constraint is one that creates a boundary condition that we must deal with. It either prevents us, stops us, or funnels us into a certain flow or way of doing things.
So pick it. Which one?
This one's
Here,
physical.
Just the idea.
The description, if I was going to put on a log, is can't use southbound 880 due to bridge collapse.
But in fact, there's two. One bridge is out and the other bridge is blocked. There are two workflows that are upset. If you look at it, elevate.
Oh, yeah.
You got to detach.
Yeah, like Jocko said, got to detach.
Elevate yourself. When you look at a constraint, don't go look at it at surface level. This is probably taken from a helicopter. But you got to detach yourself from the situation and idea it. So this is a later picture when they're repairing that bridge. But if you can see it, I'll make it way more obvious.
Yeah.
That when you look at a constraint, one bridge is destroyed, other bridge is blocked. That's blocking two flows of work, two flows of traffic here. That's two directions. That's two separate sets of people. And then when we repair it, when we do the rework to repair that constraint, you also have to consider the traffic flows or the workflows, the flow of anything, and the direction there it goes. So at some point, and this was part of the award-winning, they were able to get some of the traffic flowing again by building this structure very quickly. But they were able to release part of the constraint. So they were able to release one of the constraints, the southbound 880. So you see these people heading towards Oakland. Boom. They were able to go back to normal traffic flows. But if you're going west towards Sacramento on I-80, you still have to take an alternate route because they're still repairing the bridge. So when we think about the constraint, and when we design and assign resources, we also have to think about what it affects downstream. And if you have multiple constraints that are competing, what are ways that we can at least open some of the bottlenecks up to start alleviating the pain? And that's exactly what they did. The California Department of Transportation, or Caltrans, did that. But don't stop there. Here's a teaser. We go back. Here's an actual picture of the work. I don't want to pick on these guys, and I know the gentleman who has the feet, but I will not release his name. I will not identify him. But look at that behavior. One gentleman, and these are iron workers, and this is not an attempt to pick on iron workers, but when you are doing rework or you're relieving a constraint, sometimes we don't always design the work that's the most safe. And this is exactly what's happening. This gentleman, I can't even tell that he's tied off. And how do I tell? The little bungee cord looking connector that hooks to your D-ring.
Yeah.
It's almost as if it's not connected to anything. There's lots of slack on it. And almost his entire center of gravity is over the edge. If you look really closely, maybe this gentleman's tied off, but he's up on the top of the top rungs of that basket. And that's just risky behavior. and they're working at night, working quickly. I imagine there's people that are like, hey, we need to get this done. There's a whole bunch of, there's million, I don't know, 9 million people in the Bay Area who are potentially impacted by this bridge. So we oftentimes don't work in haste when we plan this rework to correct a constraint. So we have to consider that. You have to consider that. So my first lesson in theory of constraints is physical constraints. They starve resources. It starves resources, starves your time. It starves personnel. It starves budget. So if we have a budget problem in our industry, if we have a labor shortage, and if we're not dealing with constraints, you're actually contributing to that problem, because physical constraints, they disrupt planned sequences of workflow. It's a contributing factor in risk-taking behavior. We just saw that, right? Because it's the rushing, it's the haste, it's working at different hours, so we don't have all of the safety professionals like them who are there for the observation of that work. And then that quality and acceptance criteria get diminished. We just be like, just get it in there. I've said these words myself, like, just get it done. Right. So they starve all kinds of resources because it gets us out of our planned workflows. We don't plan for constraints, put time, personnel, and budgets to removal of constraints. We often do so in haste. And there's consequences to that. And that's what it is. So then there's non-physical constraints, and these creep into. And there are some companies out there who have some really good products to help us eliminate them. Healthy is one, using them as an example. But non-physical constraints, and I have to get a question here. It's like, this looks like a photograph, Thomas. And I'm like, yes, that is a photograph of a removed non-physical constraint. Here's a photograph of a non-physical constraint BIM models. Because we have to understand, and we build things nowadays in 3 dimensions, but not in a real world, right? So BIM models allow us, they give us the opportunity to identify non-physical constraints. Fire stopping way up above ceiling, like doing a yoga move. And the same things happen. If we don't put in that sleeve, or we put it in the wrong place, that's not going to stop the concrete from being poured. Because, hey, we can always go back and core drill a hole. But when we have to go back and core drill a hole, can you guarantee with great certainty, Felipe, that you won't disrupt anything that was embedded in that concrete?
Nope. Not even with X-ray.
Not even with X-ray. And Hilti makes the X-ray machine too.
Yep.
But Hilti definitely has some products that they sell the construction industry that deals with our inability to properly coordinate ahead of time. Or they also sell the tool to help us with our ability to coordinate with those sleeves. And we have to do both. We have to understand sometimes things get installed incorrectly, and we do have to, we have to do rework on things, but like things like doing fire caulking above ceiling, above ducts, above conduits. This is just work that is just poorly designed for human beings inside of elevator shafts, all this stuff that your acceptance gets diminished. You notice the non-physical constraints, all the disruption, it's all the same as physical constraints, because what happens is non-physical constraints, if left to their own devices, they become physical constraints. And one thing we study at DPR is the impact of that. And we actually chart these, and we were showing some of those at the conference this week in Scottsdale. But almost, and it's on a huge factor that quality issues that are identified, it's like an S curve, but like the Mount Everest of S curves. So like quality issues that are identified in pre-construction and in coordination, when we're doing like VDC coordination, we do find many, but we find exponentially more problems when we do things physical. And the reason why is because a lot of those non-physical constraints turn into physical constraints. And if those physical constraints aren't caught immediately, they turn into very complex physical constraints, like trying to execute a top of wall fire stop over a whole bunch of MEP encumbrances. So we have to understand those. And those become rework activities, and rework activities are poorly designed. They're oftentimes they come with a whole bunch of consequences, like drilling through post-tension cables, through electrical wires, through pipes with water and chemicals in them. So there's the potential for like safety hazards becomes much higher. The statistical, if you just put like recordable injuries against time, against just work hours, you're not. It's not designed well. The opportunities for a negative consequence thing increases, and if we're in the business of getting out of that or driving towards zero rework and zero injuries, then we have to get left of the line. We have to get left of the line. We have to catch these non-physical constraints. Great opportunities, BIM modeling. BIM modeling does that, but BIM modeling by itself does not do everything. It doesn't catch everything. And here's a great example of a risk-taking behavior about just a dimensional error. So this is a photo I took of a gentleman who is tied off, but think about the consequences of error here, of running that DAG saw, having that kind of error. That's a big deal. It's a big deal. So we actually design work for human beings and put them into precarious situations. We got to stop. We have to stop this. So many constraints.
So many.
What to do. And this becomes the work-life balance conversation, because we can identify and go crazy with identifying constraints. There's just so many. And I always say that there is no balance, because life is 100% of the time. If you had a work life, your right hand on your ratio, the life side is a 1, always. It's always a 1. So if you can never balance that. If one side is 100, so you have time for 3 things. Work and holidays are 2. You pick the third, right? And that's oftentimes the case. We have to make trade-offs, just our effect of life. We have to do it. So what we want to do is manage resources so that everything that the constraints are going to consume will be supplied by the non-constraints. That's one of the focusing steps that we learn in theory of constraints is subordinate your resources. The next one is managing non-constraints will not help. They won't help, since the overall system's performance is controlled by the constraints. It's a series of gates. So if we actually synchronize constrained activities in non-constrained activities, you can actually synchronize these. And Jason Schroeder and Felipe teaches us many things that I've learned from you, Felipe, to do this. So thank you. But if you actually manage non-constraints, so you actually put things in through a series of gates that you will prevent constraint-free activities just to run wild through a series of controls, you can actually synchronize tasks. And what does that do? It attacks cognitive bias. And that cognitive bias is this low-hanging fruit. This low-hanging fruit, I'm hungry, I need to eat, consume, and I'm going to eat this one that's right in front of me that's super, super easy. And it feels good when you do that. It feels great when we take this low-hanging fruit, we knock 10 items off the list. It feels good, but if we don't go, I'll use the Bay Bridge analogy. And I know, Felipe, you've looked down this this view. I have thousands of times.
I've been trapped in that traffic so many times.
Yes,
I have like PTSD with this traffic picture.
Yeah. We're going towards San Francisco, and you have to go through this bottleneck. Your other opportunity is drive clear down to the 92, which is in Mountain View, I guess. So it's
That's
like way down. It's
way
way out of the
far.
way. So San
Or
Francisco is
yeah.
basically a peninsula. It's basically an island. And there are very few ways to get to it. You got the Golden Gate Bridge and you got Bay Ridge here. Now, if you want to get into the city, you got to go through bottlenecks. It's the same with everything that we do in life and at work. There are things you have to go through. So if we have to manage constraints that are on there. So I always say, imagine if there was a car on fire, and imagine if there was a car with a leaky tire. And then imagine if you had somebody who's going to run out of fuel, which is the constraint that we need to remove first.
Car on fire.
Car on fire, because that's going to do damage to the bridge. It's going to affect more things, right? So the car on fire, we need a fire department. We need people to get the hell out of the way. We need a tow truck. We need a lot of stuff. But we have to go apply that, because if we don't apply all of those resources to it, we won't affect traffic flow whatsoever. And in fact, it'll be worse, because now there'll be damage. There'll be a car that's burned and blocking traffic lanes. So we have to get all these people organized to get the hell over, clear a path to allow for first responders to get over. They have all kinds of lights and sirens. So at least they'll get over, but it does take behavioral to get out of the way, so that first responders have to get it. So we have to think about when we prioritize constraints in the same manner, that oftentimes, yes, we're going to have to apply a whole bunch of resources to removing that constraint, but it's just that we have to avoid the cognitive bias. So here comes the constraint log. So this is how you apply this in the real world. If you're just doing this out of the gate, there are many, many, many more ways to manage constraints, but this is kind of where you start. And I'll say this, and there are great people that worked in the United States Marine Corps. They've taught me this idea that it's just about ownership. And they have a great saying, and when you go through, I guess, basic training in the United States Marine Corps, they give you a rifle, and they teach you this, and they drill it into you that this is your rifle. There are many like it, but this one is yours. Without me, my rifle is useless. Without my rifle, I am useless. A Marine without a rifle is not a Marine, and a rifle without a Marine is not a Marine. We have to have both. I will learn its weaknesses, its strengths, its parts. I will keep my rifle clean and ready. So if you have a constraint log, it's the same way. It's yours. And if it's poorly organized, or if it's without responsible parties, or if it's without proper due dates, or you're not making these commitments, it's useless.
Fact.
So it's such a great saying from the Marines. It applies with constraint log. So I put the 5 focusing steps that we learn in theory of constraints up here, and I'll go through each one as it applies to a constraint log. After you do a constraint log, there are many, many more organization and focusing steps that we can apply that can update this constraint log. One being Scrum. Scrum will help you do the elevation. It'll help you do the prioritization. It'll help you decide. It'll help you to link. It'll help you to do all of the focusing steps. So hopefully, Felipe, if you want to interject with some Scrum principles as they apply here, please do so. So let's go through the 5 focusing steps. Here's what a filled out constraint log looks like. And this will be for a part of a project. I think it's a project in the Bay Area. But let's start with these steps. So these steps, the constraint log is only a list of things. If you look below, there are many other things that you need. You need to be able to talk to craft. You need fabrication and design drawings and conversation. There are vehicles like RFIs and SMEDALs, right? They're just transmitting information around. There are prioritization and elevation techniques. Those things happen on schedules and short interval planning, those kind of things, huddles. And then there's confirmation steps. So we actually have to go physically look at stuff. So this is an issue. I picked one here. It's an angle, and it's needed an elevation change. So when we fill these things out, we have to fill out all of those 5 focusing steps. if we don't fill out information devoted to each one of those five focusing steps, this is just a list of to-dos. You're just reporting the news, is what I say.
We hear all the time that building enclosure is the #1 problem in construction. And when the task of the building enclosure is presented with so much pressure, it's something most of us would want to avoid. Until now, there has never been a course to teach someone how to manage a building enclosure. Building enclosure is a problem for every company, and the solution is often to ask someone within to try to find training or provide training to their teams to avoid these issues. Field Verified's enclosure management course is the answer to that problem. We learned the hard way, we've learned through failure, we've learned from others. This course, our team, will help those people who are assigned to manage the building enclosure be successful the first time so that they're spared some of the suffering and hardships that all of us went through. There's so much opportunity for a high return on investment, not just when an individual attends and all of the skills that they'll achieve, but when a team participates together, they can raise their level of performance by knowing what each other can do, what to expect, and they can raise the level of performance of that company as their careers excel and the company elevates along with them. The training is built on the science of how people learn. We capture all of the components that are necessary to master a skill. There's a hands-on component to the training where we're building a masonry mock-up, a metal panel mock-up, we're doing EFS, and even installing a window that later you get to test. The hands-on training gives us the opportunity to translate the lines on paper to actual construction in the field. We always laugh because after the training, people come up and say, this isn't just about building enclosure. There's a lot of leadership in here. There are a lot of people skills. That's because those skills are necessary to be successful in building enclosure and in construction. We'd love to see you get started right away. We have lots of options available. They can come to us in person at Field Verified in Phoenix, or we can bring the entire operation to your facility and train up to 25 people at a time. And we've created an online training that's available for people who might not be able to attend in person. Go to the website and contact us. We're going to start by understanding what problems you're currently experiencing and develop a specific program that's right for the needs of your company.
I like it. And that first step that you had, like making
I'll go
it,
back.
identifying the constraint. That's one of the principles that we know from a lean production system like a Toyota, which is making things visual. If you can put it down on paper so people can react to it and have a clear message, then you can have a much greater chance of communicating the right problem or need to people. And a system like Scrum, like Thomas said, absolutely will help to make this visual. And you can take this spreadsheet and turn it into a Scrum board as well and run your entire constraint log through the Scrum framework on a Scrum board, as long as you identify basic things on the tags that must be answered. Like he has, these are the column headers of each of these rows of the spreadsheet.
Yeah. You can move it a card through each one of the column headers, I suppose, right?
Yeah, you could do that too. Yeah, you could just make a task and move it through the column headers, or just make a standard task card, things that it must have, like the description. Yeah. Then the resources of who's involved, materials, people, spaces. I love it. Love it.
Yeah.
And in Last Planner system, this constraint log is one of the things that you learn is one of the moving parts and pieces of the constraint log.
It is.
For LPS.
It starts to make work ready. So if you're having trouble with the make ready process, you're probably having trouble with managing constraints. So the 5 focusing steps, I'm going to do each one. Identify the constraint. I always say, if I was going to mail that problem in a letter, what's the address? What is the physical location of that constraint? What is the address? So give things, everything, an address. Elevation change 10. That would be like a grid column between E and F. There it goes. Boom. It's on floor 2. Between E and F. Give everything an address. 2, decide which resources to devote. Focusing step 2. So you have to decide which resources you're going to give to this problem. So this problem in this instance, and these resources change, but in this instance, this is just a snapshot in time that you can see that there's an angle needed, but yeah, okay, great. There's an angle needed. Is this thing going to drop from the sky crane or drop from the heavens? No, it needs to be fabricated, right? So it needs to be fabricated and installed per this RFI, right? So that there's a little detail there. We need this angle that looks like this. It's got some things on it. It bolts to a embed or it probably gets welded, but it needs to be fabricated. We need the prescribed direction in dimensions. So oftentimes the resources that revolve around fabrication and installation might be different, might be the same, might be different. Depends on your particular situation. Link constraints to a scheduled activity or milestone, right? You have to say, what are the consequences? If this constraint isn't removed, what are the consequences that this might affect in time or to a goal? Link everything to a goal, everything to a goal. So in this particular snapshot in time, they needed an RFI responded to. So there's a vehicle that in a very standardized way in which we document information flow. And that's a request for information process. And that process is separate from your constraint log process, right? So now you're merging two together. And that way you can prioritize the response of RFIs if you have many. If there are many to pick from, which one should I do? I'm not going to do the one that's maybe due tomorrow. I'm going to do the one that has the most impact. So how do you change that prioritization? You use this focusing step. So move your due dates up and down in your RFI log accordingly to this constraint log matrix. The yellow one, prioritize and elevate constraints. That's what we were just talking about. So once you figured out your resources, once you figured out some process steps to make the removal process, now you got it. You got to elevate things. You got to prioritize and elevate. I think that's another extreme ownership thing. Maybe Jocko learned some principles from Dr. Goldratt. I keep sending him requests like through Twitter if he's actually going to review the goal. But maybe I'll have to get more creative. Maybe I'll just get on the show.
Yeah, get on the show.
But you have to prioritize and elevate constraints against your schedule. So if I have the thing that's coming up very near, and this issue is going to block something, and we're going to have to do rework or make delays, move the dang thing up, and then we have to devote those resources against that prioritization. So the most important constraint on a log should be number one, right at the top. What I mean by that is like your most prioritized, your most elevated constraint on your log floats up to the top. You have to design it that way. So that way things have to be able to move in order. So that way, if your constraint log is on a whiteboard, you're going to be constantly erasing and rewriting. This is why we need technology for constraint logs, because you just can't write them in order. I guess if you had them on a whiteboard, you could rewrite the number. So you have to understand with one look.
But then you're creating overburden to make people have to hunt and peck and search.
Yeah, you got to look, right? So put this on a screen. I oftentimes say, don't put things on screens. This is an opportunity to put things on screen because we want to float the most important constraint up to the top of the list. And that top of the list might change consistently. So utilize some technology or even utilize an agile system like a Scrum board, because that one you can move cards around very easily and restack them in order. And then the last one, and this is the subordinate resources to remove a constraint. And if you skip that step, you're just going back to command and control and not the good command and control. So you have to make an agreement. You have to make this agreement, and you have to make that agreement with the person who's going to remove the constraint, not just the agreement for them. It's not an assignment. This step is not an assignment. This step is an agreement. So we have to have an actual conversation about removing this commitment or doing the commitment. So I set this one, I think this is Summit, and they made the commitment to avoid the delay to the schedule, Summit to complete the RFI response by the 23rd of April. Right. So they've made that commitment, and the only person to make that commitment is the person who works at Summit, not the person who works at DPR. It is the conversation and a commitment that I will promise to do what I've been assigned to do. And I agree to that. I agree to that commitment. I make a promise. And by the promise, I say, I'm going to give it to you by no later than the 23rd of April. That's how you fill out a constraint. Any comments on that one?
No, other than just remind people that make work ready. That's some last planner system terminology. In Scrum, we call that sprint planning. And sprint planning, you have to make the work ready as you're bringing it from your backlog to your current sprint or your time box of work, whether that be 1 week or a month.
That's right. That's right.
Better practices and from last planner is that making work ready or clearing constraints usually happens in your planning horizon. So you're looking into the future. So like Thomas said, you can come to this sheet, make those agreements, change the dates to match the flow, looking at things like schedules and commitments. It's a living thing so that you're always clearing constraints by putting them in priority order. He said it, people, it was very subtle. Just because the RFI has a due date based on your whatever system you use that just generates that due date, maybe even based on contractual elements, doesn't mean that that's the RFI that get answered next just because it's due next.
That's exactly right. You notice there is oftentimes an opportunity to manually change that date in your systems, in your project management systems. It's there for a reason. It's there for those who want to use theory of constraints. But don't stop there. Do not stop there. I work at DPR. We have some awesome field technology people. So good. And they create one thing that they create is floor flatness graphs and charts. So that's the graph on the left that says this area is higher, this area is lower, based upon this laser scan. And they give you a heat map, and the heat map looks like a weather forecast for the United States. And the areas that are this color are here, the areas that are this color that are there. And within one look, you can see areas that are high and low. I can tell that the area is low at the elevator core, and I can see a high area in the upper right, like within instance. And that's utilizing bias. That utilizes our human brains to, within one look, if you knew what the colors meant, if you knew that ahead of time, within one look, you instantly know, oh, we got a problem here. We got a problem here. So why not do that with your problems with your non-physical constraint? Make them freaking visual.
This is the first time I've ever seen like this type of view with elevations as a heat map. This is gorgeous.
Yeah. So
like I could already tell like where I'm going to have to do like,
bushing.
Where I'm going to be spending money refinishing the concrete so I can install door frames and make all my tolerances for closing. And it looks like it's in the worst possible place. It's happening at all of your door openings on the floor. It's just so weird how coincidental that is.
Yeah. And the reason why they do that is we can overlay what you just said, like door swings and critical dimensions like elevator landings, because they got to land at a specific spot. So we might have to modify the flooring to match where it has to land. So we do these scans and then we create these reports, and these reports are incredibly visual. So I want to say, hey, why do we just have to use that for floor tolerances? Why don't we just use that for our non-physical constraints? So the picture on the right, if you have color ups, great. If you do zone maps, great. Or I should say good. It is good to have zones. It is good to have, it's good to have, color chart things, because it's the same thing. It organizes your brain very rapidly, because we learned when we were, Neanderthals, the shape and size and patterns of a saber-toothed tiger that we should either run away or understand very quickly. So we understand these patterns rapidly. And if you overlay your issues and you color code your issues, and you already know those locations, you can start to heat map where your problems are. And you can just see your eye naturally gravitates that lab area 2. This has got a lot in there. So if I was like lab area 2, what's the turnover date for that area? I'd be like, that turnover date likely at risk. Because there is a bunch of open issues that are lingering around in that lab. And in lab area 1, there's 1. Lab area 2, 1. Lab area OFC area 1, there's 2. So if you need help with your prioritization, start to heat map these things, and you can be like, whoa, we need to focus. We need to do a focus session on whatever is burdening area 2. And then all of a sudden, if we did this focus section, we can knock out, or at least design a process to go remove these constraints in that area too. So it has the same focusing steps. So these visualization techniques, they're probably already like laying around, or maybe it's taped to the wall of your trailer. And that's good. To make it great is we overlay our problems on top of those things. So if we can combine time and space in issues, now we can do prioritization. So I really like this. And if you have VDC people, or even just, I use magnets. So we'll put these on the wall, and we'll take the issues as a magnet and slap it on there. And then you could just, it's a visual technique that you can do. And then put these not in the trailer. I mean, it's good to put it in the trailer, but if you actually put this in that area, say, hey, this area, this area, this area, this area, these are problem areas. Please don't cover these up. It becomes a signal to the people at work. And if I was doing work in that area and I would be like, there's 5 issues in this area, I'm going to make a decision, or at least start asking questions. Hey, what's up with these issues, Thomas? And I'll be like, you're right. Let's rearrange our installation so that you, Mr. Plumber, who are about to install something that you're going to have to rip out and install later in a different location, instead of doing that, even though it's on the schedule that you're supposed to do that, don't. And subordinate your decision-making process against that. And here we go. Now, all of a sudden, it has this focusing step. It has an organizing effect. And now it starts to make decisions for us. What do you think about allowing a system to make human being decisions for yourself? This is overcoming bias, by the way.
This is why I use Scrum. It's a beautiful way, like you said, a powerful way to link winning. Just like Goldratt said, creating win-win solutions. Like, why would you demoralize the plumber by forcing them to do something just because the schedule says so, knowing you've got 5 constraints in the area and they're going to have rework, and somebody's going to pay for that rework. It's not free. Just don't install it yet until you clear the constraints first.
That's right. And sometimes the cost to do rework is oftentimes not monetary. It's in energy. It's in poor ergonomic situations, right? So the cost to do rework is not always a time and budget hit to your spine or your elbow or your face, right? There's a physical cost to things. And then there's a non-physical cost to things. If you're now, my back hurts because I had to do a bunch of work below something, or I had to do yoga poses all day and do a bunch of risk-taking behavior standing on the top of my scissor lift, because I have to do work over the top of it and something that's blocking me, physically blocking me. So now I'm tired, I'm hurting, and now there's this work-life balance that's super lopsided. I take that home with me, and I'm tired. And now if I have underlying issues with mental illness, if I have underlying issues with substance abuse, I just go straight there. And those become my medication. Those become my outlet. And if there's people who I love and I live with, who love me and who need me for their nurturing and attention and education, I might not have enough energy to devote to them. So there's a real cost to that. And if that swirls in a highly negative reinforcing cycle, that we often choose, it chooses sometimes mental illness overcomes us, and it leads us to some serious negative outcomes. So how do we improve mental illness in the construction industry? You're looking at it. For me, this is my opinion. You're looking at this right here, is if we can organize our work, have conversations, help people make the decisions by overcoming their cognitive biases and their fear, and just allow a system to prioritize our work for us and devoting the resources thereof. When we start knocking these out, guess what happens if there's no constraints on a floor and we had a flow chart and we did TACT? That system works. So we got to do that. So the last focusing step that Dr. Goldratt teaches us, And how do you know DPR does tack planning? Here's proof.
Proof. Shameless
And
plug.
Yeah. Well, I had to do this right before LCI Congress because there's going to be a bunch of examples and I can't wait. But how do you do make ready planning? This is what it looks like. It's a group of people. I hope a guy playing on his phone is texting out some instructions to somebody. But you can see you need many things. You need to have conversations. You need to understand locations. We need to have assignments. We need to understand sequence. But Dr. Goldratt says, do not allow inertia to cause a system constraint. Don't allow your culture. Don't allow your some schedule activity to be like, this has to be done. And we can't move this. If we just put due dates to things and we subordinate our resources to due dates instead of each other and physical and non-physical and all those things, we'll run into problems. So we have to decide as a team what to change. So how do you decide as a team? It's a picture like that. You have to decide as a team. You can't decide as a person. You definitely need a leader and you need a facilitator. You need to have a bunch of information flowing around, but you have to make that decision as a team. So you have to pinpoint your core problems, which have a major impact. That's confronting fear. Don't believe me? Get close to some core issues. Go ask some really, really core issue questions with a group of people and they will, it's just a human being. We just avoid those problems. So if we use systems to tell us, hey, we got a bunch of problems in area 2, let's go decide as a team to let's tease these issues out and go through them one at a time. So you decide what to change it to. And Dr. Goldratt says what to change to is you find the simplest solution available. What is the most simple? Simple is not easy. Simple does not equal easy, by the way. I didn't put find the easiest solution. It's the most simple. And simple uses the fewest resources. Simple uses the fewest resources. So if you said easy, the easy button could be, hey, let's just work overtime for the next 6 weeks. That's an easy button. Just turn the P6 activity to the 7-day calendar. That could be the easy way. The simplest be like, hey, hold off on this activity until this one is done. That could use few resources because you're stopping one activity. And you're allowing a constrained activity to continue slowly through. That's a decision you have to make as a group because one, you have to stop one unconstrained activity. You have to gate it like a series of gates. And so simple, my equation is it uses the fewest resources, but Dr. Goldratt says use the simplest solution. And then a very important step, and I use highlighting and colors to make our highly biased brains focus on it. And that's once your solution is known, okay, we have the solution. You have to decide how to cause the change. So you actually have to implement what are the steps to make this change. And if you do this in a group, all of a sudden task assignments and due dates and priorities and these kind of things, they start to align themselves. And if you're starting to align yourselves in a group, in a team setting, all of a sudden you have these organizing steps. And all of a sudden, if you have flow in a team setting, people get happy. They get satisfied. They enjoy it. And when people have enjoyment and happy in a group setting, and there's camaraderie and there's that work that we love to say, I said that twice for emphasis. It's teamwork. All of a sudden it's, I am a human being. I am an individual, but I also contribute to a cause that is greater than me, everybody. And that's how we overcome inertia. And I pause if you want it and say anything else. Felipe.
Yeah, that's working to that. What we talk about, we learned in the Scrum patterns for happiness, purpose, an intrinsic motivator. Like Thomas said, when we get into that flow state and people start naturally gravitating and aligning, you're working to a higher purpose than yourself as a team to accomplish something, this goal. Like you said, do everything towards a goal. In Scrum, we have that. We call it the goal in Scrum. Exactly.
It's called the goal?
It's called the goal. Yeah, it's the same word. It's the same word. It's like these great ideas all borrow and build and play well with each other.
That's awesome. So, last planner system, if you're doing it, you can pull plan the constraint removing process. There's a great organizing process within the last planner framework. That's pull planning. It is a great system to help you organize constraint removal. So if you have a constraint that's super, super complex and it's kind of overwhelming, turn 180 degrees to your whiteboard behind you and start pull planning. if it's a complex one, and that way you can make the simple to understand production plans off of that pull planning effort. So even the pull planning on the board might be complex. Let's make it even more simple with a more easy to digest production plan. So this is I wanted to plug the last planner system because doing a constraint log by itself, not the last planner system. It's an effort that's within it. Doing pull plans by themselves, good. If you start to combine these things and you combine Scrum with your constraint removal process, if you combine TACT with your constraint removal process, if you combine your visualization, BIM models, meetings, your problem solving techniques, your retrospectives that happen, like your plus deltas. If we start to combine these things and stack them on top of each other instead of being like, oh, this is so much extra work. Your extra work is your wasteful work. Get rid of that. Throw that out. Let's stop doing that and start to stack up these powerful techniques. So the last thing I will say with theory of constraints in construction is you got to combine your efforts with everything else. This is not a one-off process. This is a integrated process. So, and then I have some resources that definitely is missing. One, construction Scrum. I'll throw that on there, but it definitely you need to get that one. But go get on Audible. So what I tell people to do, go consume the goal, and then immediately after, go consume the undoing project, because they link together. And the goal is, okay, I need to have these focusing steps. I have the activities. I have this prioritization. Then you go to undoing, and it's like, change your mind, change your brain, change the way you think about things, overcome bias. The undoing project is a story about the gentleman that wrote the book, Thinking Fast and Slow. So it's like the behind the scenes, behind the scenes of how to uncover your bias and how to work through those things. Lean Builder, of course, they actually have a blog post, boost your constraint management skills. I go straight over there immediately, and then actually just start discussing, have conversations about constraints. And if you start to use those words, constraints, and you start to talk about physical and non-physical, everybody will start engaging. It's just how we work as human beings. You can sit next to me in an airplane. I can describe why it's so wasteful to stand up if you're in the 20th row when there's 20 rows of people ahead of you. Just relax. We just sat it on an airplane for 6 hours. We can sit down and enjoy ourselves for another 5 minutes. And then engage with other lean builders, because here's the thing, Felipe, doing any engagement, it just builds upon itself. This is the best part. And there are no boundaries to engagement. Like Jennifer Lacey and I work for highly competitive companies, and Felipe and me, we both work for highly competitive. Like we are constantly in similar assessments. So there's a competition, but here's the thing. It don't matter. You imagine if the competition was Robinson Morton, DPR, and Bolt. This is a selection I would like to have if I was an owner.
That's going to be tough. Yeah, it's going to be tough for the owner to pick.
Tough decision, right?
Exactly. It's like we always tell people, like when they ask, why do we do stuff like this? Why do we collaborate? And I take the answer comes right from Deming himself, William Edwards Deming, Dr. Deming, We learned from him that you need to have good competition in order to increase your skills. Another way that I've heard it said, I think Jocko actually might have said this: iron sharpens iron, steel sharpens steel, diamond cuts diamond.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when we sharpen the saw, I think that's a Stephen Covey reference.
That's right.
But get even better. So it's like it has this compounding effect. And the best part is it's mostly free. Maybe you got to spend some time and money on getting physically located, but we get better and better and better. And our industry needs that. And I'm willing to help. So hopefully we can share this out to the world. But that's what it is. So you have to learn all these things, and you have to learn them. This doesn't come naturally because of bias. And then to get even better, to boost your game further, you have to engage with other people, and other people sometimes are outside your organization, and that's okay.
Same for me. Thank you for giving all these beautiful steps and bringing theory constraints to life with your stories. People watching this, you need to get out there and start applying it. And he gave you several examples of how to apply it. It's not the only way to apply it. Thomas uses this in just how he thinks now. He's trained himself with practice to think this way. And I've told my son the same thing. I said, as you learn what the system is, now subordinate the system to serve you and exploit the system to your benefit. I learned that from Goldratt.
Because it allows you to build these super simple visualization things. It could be a sketch, could be a color drawing, could be anything. It could be a snapshot out of a model. When we utilize that in the setting, when you bring that to someone out in the field and be like, this thing right here, it's like, it shoots all of that information, everything that you brought to that date, it shoots it all into their eyeballs, and it gives them everything. It gives them everything that they might need, or at least it helps them understand the situation. And when we do that, it's so awesome, because it's like, now this whole thing, this idea of respecting people, all of the people that gave and spent energy and did problem solving, and all of that was to serve one purpose, and that is to help people. It's to help people. It's a completely serving process. And that when we do that, and we actually say, my contribution is important, but my contribution is towards a goal. And when we align ourselves, when we do that stuff, it has this reinforcing effect, and that reinforcing effect is, and really like it, in a system, it creates enthusiasm. And when you have enthusiasm, and we had DPR, we call it spinning the flywheel, because it's the hardest thing to get a flywheel spinning is the initial push, and it's harder. And it is, it's like, this is a lot of work, and I got to have meetings, and I got to include people I don't like talking to. I have to do this. These are all required steps, and I run through these focusing steps. And once I do that, I've got the flywheel spinning, and a flywheel, it has a balancing effect on an engine or a system. And that flywheel is hard to start, but once it gets going, it balances the system. And that balancing system, for me, and I learned this from Jesse Fernandez, it's enthusiasm, or it's passion, or it's knowledge. And when we focus our energy and our effort on that, we can spend less time devising systems of control, or spend less time writing delay letters. We can spend less time angling leverage deals, right? Because there's no choice now. It's like, or the choice is super hard, because I was like, all these companies who I want to choose for my project are amazing. And when we do that, then all of a sudden having assessment about cost or money is no longer an option, because we know there's going to be less waste in this on this project, with this organization, and in this industry. So how do we start changing our industry? How do we start helping mental illness? You got to start doing stuff. You can't talk about it. We definitely need to highlight that there is an issue. That's step one. Step two, start doing stuff. I'm super excited to get this out, and then work with super people I respect deeply. Felipe, I got into Scrum because you gave me your business card, and I was like, what is that? And I went and typed it into Google, and then it was like Alice, just down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So you got to engage with people. So I'm just so happy to be a part of what you're doing. This is awesome.
Yeah, likewise, man. And it's like I said before, like when I heard you pipe up from the back of the room when we were at that last planner conference and you just asked your questions or made your statements, I knew instantly, like, this guy knows. This guy knows what's what. Because it's so,
one.
yeah, it's so rare to find. A lot of people talk about, things like they know what they're talking about. Like they just use the buzzwords, but you can, if you've done it yourself, you can hear the difference from another practitioner versus a theoretician. And theory is important, but you have to execute. You've got to do it. You got to put it into practice. We call that empirical process control theory or empiricism, which is just fancy words to describe learning by doing.
That's right. Awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very special thanks to my guest. I'm Felipe Engineer Manriquez. The EBFC show is created by Felipe and produced by a passion to build easier and better. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, everybody. Let's go build.